Rolex does not sell watches. It sells the uncertainty of whether you will be allowed to buy one. You can walk into a dealer with $20,000, know exactly which model you want, be ready to buy it that afternoon, and still leave with nothing. Not because the watch is too expensive, because the dealer is also making a decision. Who gets access isn't necessarily determined by who arrived first or who brought the most money. It is determined by a system the customer cannot see. That reversal, where the seller decides whether the buyer is eligible, is one of the most powerful mechanisms in luxury. And here is where it becomes structural. Rolex primarily sells new watches through its network of authorized retailers. And this creates an important distinction. Rolex manufactures the watches. But when a highly desirable piece reaches a retailer, that retailer ultimately has to decide which customer gets it. There may be far more interested buyers than available watches. So the transaction changes. Instead of, "I have the money, sell me the watch," it becomes, "I have the money, will you allocate me the watch?" That single word, allocation, changes the psychology of the purchase. The customer is no longer simply shopping. The customer is competing for access. And once access becomes limited, relationships become valuable. People often describe this process as a waiting list, but it usually isn't a simple numbered line where customer number 27 automatically receives the 27th watch. Retailers know their customers. They know purchasing histories. They know who regularly visits. They know who has bought other products. And when an extremely desirable watch becomes available, retailers have discretion over who receives the call. That doesn't mean every dealer follows an identical secret formula. They don't. But it does mean two people walking into the same store with identical amounts of money can have completely different experiences. One may wait months or years. Another may receive an opportunity much sooner. The difference isn't necessarily wealth, it's access. And that distinction is exactly what makes the system powerful. This raises the obvious question. If millions of people want Rolex watches, why doesn't Rolex simply flood the market with the models everyone wants? Because maximizing units sold and maximizing brand power are not necessarily the same thing. Imagine being able to walk into almost any shopping mall and immediately purchase whichever Rolex you wanted. No wait, no uncertainty, no hunt, no relationship with the dealer. Rolex might sell more watches in the short term, but something else would disappear. The feeling that the product is difficult to obtain. Scarcity creates tension between desire and availability. And in luxury, that tension has value. When everyone who wants something can immediately have it, ownership becomes less effective as a signal. And then something unusual happens. A watch that is difficult to obtain at retail can become even more desirable outside the authorized dealer network. Buyers unwilling to wait can turn to the secondary market. There, certain references have historically traded above their official retail prices, depending on the model and market conditions. Think about what that communicates. The official price tells you what Rolex charges. The secondary market price tells you what some buyers are willing to pay to skip the access problem. That difference effectively puts a price on impatience, and it reinforces the idea that obtaining the watch directly from an authorized retailer is itself an achievement. The purchase becomes two products at once: the watch and the privilege of getting the watch at retail. This system also changes customer behavior. Normally, brands chase customers. Advertising follows you. Discounts tempt you. Salespeople try to close you. But when demand dramatically exceeds supply for a particular luxury product, the power relationship can reverse. Customers begin checking in. They build relationships. They communicate their interest. They wait for calls. In practice, some buyers purchase other pieces, not because Rolex mandates it, but because building a relationship with a dealer can influence future allocation decisions. They're hoping that history eventually unlocks access to the piece they really want. The brand doesn't have to convince those customers that the product is desirable. The inability to immediately obtain it helps reinforce that desire. This is where scarcity stops being merely an inventory condition. It becomes part of the experience. The remarkable thing is that Rolex's greatest asset isn't steel. It isn't gold. It isn't even mechanical watchmaking. Those things can be replicated. The harder thing to replicate is perception.
For decades, Rolex has attached its name to achievement, sport, exploration, wealth, and success. So, when supply for certain models fails to satisfy demand, the shortage interacts with something Rolex already possesses: enormous cultural desire. Scarcity without desire is just unsold potential. But scarcity attached to one of the world's most recognizable luxury brands becomes something entirely different. It becomes status. There is a limit to this strategy. Scarcity can create desire, but too much frustration can also push customers away. Competitors exist. Consumer tastes change. Secondary market prices move. And if customers begin believing that access is impossible rather than difficult, exclusivity can become irritation. That means Rolex has to balance two opposing forces. It needs enough watches in the world to remain culturally dominant, but it also benefits when its most desirable watches don't feel ordinary. Too available, and some of the mystique disappears. Too inaccessible, and customers stop playing the game. That balance is where luxury becomes less about manufacturing and more about control. Most luxury brands sell scarcity. Rolex sells judgment. And judgment is one scarcity no factory can fix.